Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Was frag ich nach der Welt, which translates to Why Should I Have Any Concern About the World? Kind of an interesting title, all things considered. All in all, this is an interesting chorale, namely because of the way that it was notated. We have these longer note values that happen in regular intervals, formal intervals, like the long note values that would usually be notated with the fermata above each, but we have these longer phrases instead that have a fermata at the end of the system. So that's kind of an interesting visual component of the score, and when you listen to it, it's kind of interesting because some of the cadential structures that are implied in the middle of the phrase would be talking points if they were their own contained unit. However, they're just kind of part of the phrase, so it's interesting. We'll talk about it when we get there. Two sharps in the key signature. We start on A major over C sharp and we end on D major, so I reckon we're in the key of D major, and we're just starting off with a dominant and first inversion. We then have D, A, D, and F sharp. That's a root position D major triad with a neighboring seventh in the bass. And then we have another D major chord again, just with a rotation of the voices, so no need to reanalyze. Some passing tones in the alto and the bass, and then we have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is a D major triad in first inversion. This becomes a very common harmonic pattern where he takes a chord and just inverts it over the course of the measure. We have a neighbor tone here in the bass, and then we have F sharp, D, A, and A, which is just another D major triad, and then we have D and F sharp here, so the chord kind of gets turned into root position here. And then we cadence on G major, or I call it a cadence because that's what it looks like and what I'm used to calling it, but it's just a four chord, G, D, G, and B. It sounds like he just has a pregnant pause right here at the end of this little sub-phrase, I guess, if we're calling this whole idea a phrase. From a formal standpoint, if you were performing, you'd probably treat this like a phrase, then this like a phrase, then this like a phrase, and so on and so forth. But this sounds like a subdominant cadence. It sounds like 1 going to 4 over a long stretch of harmonic rhythm. Then we have another G major triad, just a rotation of the voices. And then we get a similar harmonic pattern over this measure. We have A, G, C sharp, and E, which is A7. That's our dominant. Neighboring seventh in the bass, no need to mark that. Neighbor tone in the alto. And then we have the same chord again on the next beat, with three passing tones. One of them is delayed, and that spells B, F sharp, B, and E, so not really analyzable, triadically that is. And then we have C sharp, E, C sharp, and A, or C sharp, E, A, and A, which is taking the 5-7 chord and turning it into first inversion without the seventh, so we'll just put 6-3 there, the neighbor tone in the bass. Then we get C sharp, A, E, and G, which takes the chord, keeps it in first inversion, and then puts it in, reintroduces the seventh before going back to root position. So we'll put 7 there in parentheses. Then we have D, A, D, and F sharp, which is our tonic triad, and then we have the same one again, just with a rotation of the upper voices. Then we're moving ahead to the next subphrase or phrase, however you want to look at it. We have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is a first inversion D major triad, so we'll just add the figured bass there. G, G, D, and B, that is a root position G major triad, so that's a 4 chord with a passing tone in the tenor. We have E, B, G, and B. This is E minor in root position, that's a 2 chord in the key of D major. Then we have A, C sharp, F sharp, and A. However, what I think is actually happening here is this C sharp is kind of like a chord. It looks like a chord tone in disguise, but it's actually this D right here that I think is what we're looking for, because we're getting towards the end of the phrase, and the 2 is probably functioning like a predominant chord. So I think this is D major over A, or 1-6-4. Then we get another accented non-chord tone. This time it's the D. A, C sharp, E, and G, which is 5-7. And because these are sort of little sub-phrases that all contribute to the whole, I've listened to a couple of performances, and the majority of them just sing right through it. There was one performance where they treated all of these with fermatas like their own subphrase, or like their own individual phrases, but the majority of the performances sang all the way through, all the way until the end. So regardless, it's like a 1-6-4 going to a 5 that then goes to a 1. D major, D, D, A, and F sharp. And here is where we get our first hint of another key. We see G sharp in the melody. We're moving to the key of A major, but the first part of the phrase still sounds like D major. We have A, C sharp, and E. That's an A major triad in root position, which is our 5. D, A, D, and F sharp, which is our tonic D major. And I think this here is where we modulate to A major, because this cadence right here is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So D also happens to be the subdominant in the key of A, so we'll just mark that as 4. Neighbor tone in the bass, D, B, E, and G sharp. That is E7 over D, that's 5-4-2, our dominant in third inversion. This B is a chord tone, and it's kind of like turning the chord into second inversion, but we'll go ahead and we will mark that. It's not really contributing to the chord progression, really. Actually, no, I'm going to stay consistent. I'll make it 4-3 right here. Might as well. And then we have C sharp, A, E, and A. That is a root position A major, a first inversion A major triad, so 1-6. That's where we expect 5-4-2 to go. And this is really less of a chord tone and more of just a Actually, if you see what's going on, see what he does with the bass here. He takes the two bass figures that we've seen with the eighth notes and flips them. So we get the first one second and the second one first. So 5-4-2 we expect to go to 1-6. So this B is more of an embellishing tone, or like an enclosure, right? We have D and B surrounding the C sharp. But he very easily could have just gone down to the C sharp, but he needed something. If he was going to use this bass figure, he needed something to get to the C sharp from the 5-4-2, so he used this figure to surround the C sharp. Otherwise the C sharp would not occur metrically on the spot that he wanted it to. Regardless, we have a neighbor tone on the bass. We have C sharp, A, E, and A, which is another tonic triad in first inversion, so no need to reanalyze. And here we have 4 non-chord tones. So let's go ahead and see if those are analyzable. We have D, D, F sharp, and B. That's B minor over D, which is 2-6. Getting ready for a cadence, so it makes sense to have a predominant here. Here we have E, B, E, and G sharp. That is an E major triad in root position. Bass leaps down, leaps down an octave, but the chord stays the same. And then we cadence on 1, A major. So looking ahead, it looks like we move back to D major for the next subphrase, and I think it happens over the reiterated A major chord that happens on beat 4. We can just call A now 5 in the key of D major. And then we go to D, 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 F sharp, and A, which is our tonic triad. We've seen something like this before. However, the only difference is that the melody looks like it has more material, like from the tenor, and the tenor looks like it has a similar line as well. Yeah, right. Sorry, I was getting confused. I'm like, wait, that didn't make sense. It does make sense. If you compare them, we see that we have the tenor kind of having the A to the A to the D, like we have right here, and the tenor just gets its own line. It just has a static D, like its last note, but I don't think that's super significant. But we have 1, we have 1 again, and then we get 6, or 1-6, F sharp, D, A, and D. So no need to reanalyze, just change the figured bass. Some neighbor tones going on. And here we get the same thing. So it's like the first phrase, again, just a revoicing of the chords. And then we get G major, right, cadencing on 4, like a subdominant cadence, or whether you look at this as an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of G. That's how I'd analyze it if the phrase ended in G, but this is sung all the way through. So this feels like more just like a prolongation of the harmonic rhythm. And here's actually probably the most interesting aspect of the chorale. We have G major going to B major. So this kind of sounds like the idea of E minor here, like a 3 going to a 5. It's not maybe it is direct. I think there are a couple of different ways you can analyze it. I'm going to analyze it as a direct modulation because E immediately follows it, and E is our 5 in the key of A, and this B over D sharp is 5/6 of 5. However, if you wanted to analyze this as a common chord modulation, what you could do is you could say 5/6 of 2 is now 5/6 of 5 in the key of A major. And you could treat that as as your analysis as well if you feel like that's a common chord. But another way to think about it is like if you think of this little phrase or this little fragment, it's not a phrase, it's a fragment of G, B, E, it's almost like a phrase in E minor or a fragment in E minor, G being the mediant, B being the dominant, E. We would expect E minor here, but he goes to E major, and that's the deceptive nature of the progression. But regardless, we do end up in the key of A major. Even with this D sharp here, it's kind of just like a little tonicization of the dominant here. But then we get the same chord again, E, G, sharp, E, and B. And then we have F sharp and A, those are just passing tones. And then we have G sharp, B, E, and E, that's just taking the chord and inverting it. Notice how this is pretty much the pattern. We get the chord, and then we invert it. Same thing happens here. And then the chord kind of gets turned into root position here when the bass changes very briefly before we cadence on 1, A major. And we get a very similar idea between the phrases, but in this phrase we're in A as opposed to this phrase we're in D, if we are comparing the two systems, the two halves. Still very similar to one another. And I think it's at this point where we briefly visit D before we have... it sounds like an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of B to me. It also has aspects of a deceptive cadence, but I think... Yeah, I think this A is our dominant in the key of D as well. So when we go to F sharp, D, D, and A, we have a D major triad in first inversion, and that goes to G, D, G, and B, which is a 4 chord, neighbor tone in the bass, G, D, A, and A. This G I think is an accented non-chord tone, and it's really F sharp, D, A, and A, which is a tonic triad, D major in first inversion. Then we have G, D, G, and B, which is another 4 chord. And because I think this is kind of like an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor, we'll call this G now 6 with a neighbor tone in the bass. And then we get G, E, B, and C sharp, which would be like a 2 chord in the key of B. But I really think what's happening here is it's these two tones that are kind of our chord tones here. We have A sharp, E, E, and C, which is like a 7/6 of... No, I'm gonna walk that back. I'm gonna walk that back. And the reason why I'm going to walk that back is because if we look at the phrase, it sounds like a deceptive progression. It sounds like this is 6. It does not sound like it's the tonic. G, E, B, and C sharp is a 7/4/3 chord in the key of D major. But what ends up happening on this beat is if we look at what happens, we actually get A, E, E, and C sharp, or A sharp rather, which would be 7/6/4 of 6. And that's what makes it deceptive, is because we get that little turn to B. We get the secondary leading tone that surrounds B, as opposed to this B resolving down to A. The A gets turned into an A sharp and contextualizes the B as our tonic now. That's what I think is happening here. It sounds like a deceptive progression, so I'm going to go against my notes where I had it analyzed like so. I had it analyzed like in the key of... If we were to analyze this in the key of B minor, we have this as like a 2/4/3, and then we have this as like a 7/6/4 going to 1. And it's like a very weak, imperfect authentic cadence. But all in all, I think it's more likely to analyze this as a deceptive progression because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a deceptive progression. But regardless, we do modulate back to the key of D major, this B minor chord. Oh, actually, no, we don't need to reanalyze the modulation back because we are in the key of B minor already. Sorry about the erasing, that made that very difficult to read, I'm sure. But we go to C sharp, E, A natural, and A with the passing seventh here in the alto, which is 5-6, and then that goes to, you would expect 1, D, D, F sharp, and A, tonic triad, root position, F sharp, A, E, and G. I think this E and G are accented non-chord tones, so really what's implied here is a 1-6 chord. But notice how he doesn't allow the 1-6 chord to fully actualize because we have a G in the bass here. It's really interesting. He does this a lot with suspensions, or not suspensions, but when he doesn't let the chord resolve because another note interrupts it, and we get instead G, A, D, and F sharp, as opposed to F sharp, A, D, and F sharp. So it's interesting. We have A, D, and E. This D is like a 4-3 suspension over the bass, and really just what's being implied here is a 5 chord. We have a neighbor tone in the tenor before the chord fully realizes A, C sharp, and E with a passing seventh in the tenor. And then we cadence on D major, D, F sharp, A, and D. Perfect, authentic cadence. So all in all, this is a really interesting chorale, I think mostly from a formal standpoint. The fact that there aren't fermatas, I checked a couple of different editions and none of them had fermatas in them, so there had to be some sort of consistency to it, which is interesting because instead of singing the whole thing without fermatas, we have fermatas at the ends of the system. I wonder why that's significant. But all in all, pretty straightforward chorale. Everything more or less functions the way that we would expect. This deceptive cadence here and this modulation to A, I think, are the two harmonic, unique highlights of the chorale. But you see this common motive in the bass where we get a chord that is inverted over the span of an entire measure. And then we get a cadence on a chord other than the tonic. Sometimes we get a measure where the bass is emphasizing the dominant, and then we cadence on the tonic. And it's just an oscillation between those two ideas, or just swapping them in and out. That's today's analysis. This is a pretty straightforward chorale. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel as well. Making these videos has been a really awesome journey so far. I'm really excited to continue along in this journey. There are so many more chorales to look at, but it's still hard to believe that I'm 115 episodes and I've been very consistent with this, and it's been really awesome. So I am very much looking forward to the journey moving forward. And if you want to go on the journey with me, consider subscribing to the channel. I upload every day where we look at a Bach chorale, and I'm following the order of the BWV numbers. So we are on BWV 64. You might be making the connection in your head, wait, why are we not in and around episode 64 then? It's because I changed the order in which I was doing things. The edition that I was looking at beforehand did not list the chorales in order of the BWV collection. Instead, it ordered them arbitrarily, and I came across a chorale that was printed, the exact same harmonization printed twice. So I scrapped that edition as my source material and found a more reliable one online, and that's what I've been following. So there are other chorales that break the order on my YouTube channel. If you're interested, if you're looking for a particular chorale that you're fond of, check out my playlist and see if it's there. If not, I will get around to it eventually. Maybe it's something to look forward to. Let me know if you have any difference in your analysis as well in the comment section, and I'm looking forward to discussing with those of you who do want to engage in some conversation about this sort of thing. It's super fun. On that note, thank you again so much for watching, and I hope you take care.